being idiosyncratic with the work that you create is even more important than ever, because you can't compete with the $200 million ghost movie. So don't make a generic ghost movie. Make something that's you, like unequivocally.
Welcome to Filmmaking Framed, your video podcast uncovering the realities of filmmaking. I'm your host, Daniel Hughes.
And I'm your host, Tom Dexter. With us today are filmmakers Alix and Keir Siewert, who have just debuted their first feature film, Kill Your Lover. Welcome.
Hi,
thanks for having us.
So usually in this podcast, we ask our guests to define their role, but you guys are obviously multi-talented, having made this amazing feature film. So please pitch us Kill Your Lover.
Okay, so Kill Your Lover is about a toxic relationship between Dakota and Axel. Dakota is kind of seeing the forest for the trees, realizing that the relationship isn't really working out and that they're not right for each other. So she tries to break up with Axel, but the more she tries to break up with him, the more he starts to grow weird black veins all over his body. And when he touches people, he melts their skin, and things just keep going from bad to worse, and it escalates, and there might be a bit of a metaphor in it, shall we say. You know?
And what inspired you to work on the project?
Quite frankly, we were just like, we've made a lot of short films, and we were like, okay, it's just time to make a feature film. Mostly because we gone to a film festival and we saw a bunch of debut feature films, and we were like, oh, I feel like maybe we've been holding ourselves back a bit, like overthinking, like, oh, it needs to be, I don't know, a Cannes premiere or something like that. And we were like, you know what, like, we've got all of the skills, because like Keir and I both direct, we've both produced, and we can write something. We've written a lot of streamlined linear kind of stories like that, that I think we just thought, yeah, we can just do something straightforward.
Well, and I think there's a real difficulty too. I think you can get in this really easy mindset of, if I'm going to make a debut, it needs to be Ari Aster making Hereditary, or something like that. And I think like the reality is, a lot of our favorite filmmakers, they made something small. They made something like, you got like, so I think our inspiration was more like Following by Christopher Nolan, or Slacker, Richard Linklater, She's Gotta Have It, Spike Lee. It's kind of like bold but very sort of cheap movies that are kind of really there about trying to be like, trying to use as a calling card or as a showcase for, what you as a filmmaker can do.
I suppose feature films, it can be quite intimidating, the idea of making one, especially when you're stepping up from shorts. And I guess, did you feel sometimes it's easy just to rip the plaster off, let's make a feature and then, keep growing from there rather than just keep holding back? I
think because we were talking about this on the way over here, actually, like technology and cameras are more affordable now. And it means that you can put something together a bit more easily. But that also means that in terms of short films, there are a lot more people making short films. So we keep talking about this notion of, I actually think the best way forward is to try and put together a micro-budget feature film if you want to step up. And obviously the pandemic got in the way of a couple of things, but I think it was also what made us wake up and go, you know what, I think the moment is now, from that perspective.
Well, I do think there is like this element that we've kind of really... I think, a little bit through personal experience, but I think it's something that, you're seeing as kind of a trend within, the industry as a whole, is the reality is anybody can make a short. It's not that hard. It's not that cost. I mean, a good short versus a bad short, obviously that there is some metric in that, but the reality is that it's very achievable. And the reality is, and if being brutally honest, most people don't give a fuck about your short. It's like, and that's it's like we all have this fantasy that we're going to put our short into a festival, and then suddenly what we always call the man with the cigar sort of is sitting in the back, and he suddenly, just comes up to you at the end and goes, "Kid, I love your gumption. Yeah, here's 20 million. Go make your feature." And it just doesn't happen like that. And I think like it used to be, when you made a short, you had to, in like the 90s, you had to have, you shot on film that was like cost prohibitive. You had to really invest in it. You had to put, and there was a lot less, well, there was just a lot less of them as well, so it was like, and now I think micro budget features are kind of the new short.
Yeah, absolutely. And to give a kind of said example, with the rise of email, call sheets could be sent way later, where in the past they had to be printed out to be handed out on wrap. Whereas I've had jobs where I've received an email at 1 a.m. with the call sheet for a shooting day that's 7 a.m. because there are discussions that can now happen after wrap and there's still a way to distribute it. So, but it allows that decision making to be pushed further down the line. And in the same way, with the move from film to digital, it's now, as you say, not cost prohibitive. And there is a way to just delete and shoot over, whereas you couldn't do that with film. So it allows people to make decisions far later than they previously had to.
Which is also great, but I wouldn't necessarily advise, especially on the level that we made our feature on. I think what was so beneficial is that we did fix it in prep, which I will always go with as much as I possibly can. So it's great to have those facilities for when you need them, but I would always go with fix it in prep because we made our feature in 15 days. And I think that is it. Like, a lot of people are shooting features in less and less time, and part of the ones that end up, going well, I think are planned to a T. Like, we met someone who made a feature in 5 days, and we weren't expecting it to be very good, but it was actually fucking brilliant. And we were like, oh, I understand why, because we talked about his process with it. So we storyboarded the whole thing. We worked things out way ahead of time, and we shot in 2 separate blocks as well. So we did all the flashbacks in an August shoot, and then we took a 2-month break, which is when the actors grew their hair, additional production design, that kind of thing, came back, gave us a bit more time for the special effects makeup as well. And we came back and we shot the other 10 days, the horror film, if you will.
Yeah.
And that helped us out. But that's just how we ended up doing things.
So the shoot was 15 days. So how long was it from we need to do this to wrap?
It's kind of an interesting one because we were essentially, it kind of started at Fright Fest 2021, was it 2021? Where we were there with an anthology feature called Isolation, which we did like one segment of. And we were just kind of there, and we were just kind of like, we were looking at the features, and we were kind of like, there's nothing that says that we can't do this. And so we really came out of that going like, okay, we need to make a feature, and it was basically like, come August of next year, we need to be shooting a feature. So we essentially gave ourselves a year to essentially put together the feature and to be rolling cameras on it. So I think we came up with the idea and wrote the first draft within the first 3 months. We cast through the first couple of months of the year, then kind of like we're putting the makeup and all of the stuff together. And like also we were partially trying to crowdfund at that point as well. And it was really the thing that we keep always saying about it is we were essentially building the ship as we were sailing it. And I think that that's the thing you really learn very quickly is it's one thing to be going, oh, we'd like to make a thing, because everybody would like to make a thing. But when you say we're making something, jump on with us, people become a lot more interested. There's a lot more like people go, oh, I can see that you're actively doing something. Yeah. That makes a difference.
It's like, oh, the train's moving. Oh, the train's moving. Oh, great. Okay, well, maybe I should join in. Like, I don't want to miss out. You can benefit from FOMO sometimes. I've been there myself. I'm like, oh, that looks cool. Like, that's actually happening.
I think the thing that we learned really quickly too is that you just have to keep pivoting. So we had to recast 2 months before the film, but we were just like, we put this date down. We're not moving it in any capacity because we know that if we move it, it's so easy to keep kicking it down by another 3 months, another 3 months, another 3 months. And we got to that point where August was coming around. We didn't have enough money to shoot the whole thing. And we were like, okay, well, let's try and make this work to our advantage. Like the film has flashbacks in it. So let's shoot the flashbacks over 4 days. Then we can use it as an asset. The actors have 2 months, 3 months to then sort of grow their hair or have a kind of different look. And then they just naturally look different between the flashbacks, the past and the present. And, came back and shot the last 11 days in November, once we'd been able to take some time, look at what we had, get some more money and kind of like be able to actually execute the thing. So, we wrapped the film probably about 14 months from when we decided just initially, we're going to make a feature. And then we had the complete finished film within 2 years of that. So that would be kind of like the time
we
frame.
fully wrapped post-production in August of 2023.
Yeah. So August 2021 was when we sort of started with the idea. And then August 2023 is when we basically had everything
Pretty much
wrapped.
2 years to the day,
Yeah,
actually.
Basically.
Did losing the cast affect your financing?
No, we weren't really because we worked with a lot of actors in the past, we weren't really going after name people. We kind of really, because of the subject matter of what we were doing, we kind of just wanted people who were really committed to the concept of what we were doing, and we're going to just sort of be very invested in it. And I've just heard too many stories about people who are like, they're a low budget film, they're trying to get some name in, and the name doesn't actually really mean anything in the sales. Like, nobody really actually cares about this person.
Depending on the level of person.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm talking, but that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
If you're talking about like somebody who's going to show up for your $50,000 movie or something like that, it's like a low budget movie of some sort, like micro budget short, micro budget feature or something like that. Like, a lot of times those people are not going to be anyone who's really going to sell anything for you. So you're better off just kind of actually getting people who are, and like, you don't want somebody who's going to show up for 6 days, be kind of like, how long is this going to take? And then sort of like leave. We needed people who are going to be actually really committed to the emotional and sort of like the emotional element of what we're doing.
I think that's particularly important in genre as well, where it can be about the delivery of the performance and not necessarily who they are. So as long as they understand the story, you can set it on the basis that it is genre and not necessarily who the talent are.
Yes and no. I think what I would say is, personally, I think we're experiencing at the moment that because of the A24 boom, horror is more popular than it has been maybe 10 years ago even. So I feel like the studios have started moving into that space more. And so there is more competition at the moment. So you can absolutely still do a micro budget feature and horror is more likely to sell. That is still very true. And you can do it with no names. But we've definitely seen a bit of, there's only a certain level that you can get to with that. But as a starting point, still very valid. I just wanted to say something to Keir's point as well about casting names. Is I have an actual experience with this with a short film that I made. I won't name it, but basically I was trying to cast names because that's what I thought I should do, what I needed to do to get validity. And then I couldn't get the people that I originally wanted. But instead of casting people that I knew were good for the roles that maybe I had more of a relationship with already, I was like, but I should still try and get someone who's had some credits. So I guess what I would say is I kind of ended up with a halfway house. I didn't end up with an A-lister, but then I ended up with like just someone who'd done some TV, and that's great, but like effectively didn't end up having that same level of appeal that I thought I was going for. I think ultimately I felt like it directly ended up affecting the feature in the sense that we were like, no, we're just going to go with people that are going to be committed and also people we already knew and had worked with for the most part to get really great performances out of them instead of worrying about any level of just production necessities and all that kind of stuff that come with someone who maybe has been in the industry for longer.
Well, and I think it's always that really sort of strange thing of like, I think this notion of who counts as a name is always oddly debatable as well. Because, we've had friends who've gone through projects where they go through this whole thing of like trying to appease the financiers by bringing in some kind of name, somebody like that. And then the funny thing is once it goes to the actual market, nobody cares. They're like, yeah, okay, I recognize that person. They kind of did some things in the 90s, but nobody's going to buy it in like Eastern Europe because that person was in it. Like nobody cares. Like there's variations on that where, it's like for whatever reason, Steven Dorff is very bankable in Eastern Europe for some reason. So there'll always be that thing of like, there'll be people who are willing to pay Steven Dorff $1 million to show for 6 days because you're guaranteed certain international sales with it, which, I personally don't get because, over here, it doesn't really make a difference to, but it's all kind of smoke and mirrors, and anyone who claims there's an exact science to it and that these people are definitely bankable as opposed to these person is just completely blowing smoke up your ass.
Definitely there's been the decline of the movie star. Like with the MCU, people showed up for the franchise rather than the stars. I'm curious why you think that's
I would
happened.
say it's because movie stars used to be the IP. So it used to be like you showed up because, so when you went to see, so especially like if I think about like my childhood in the 90s, if I'm going to see a Tom Cruise movie, Tom Cruise's face is on the poster. It's like, he's my guarantor. He's that person that I'm going to. That's the experience. I know what I'm getting out of a Tom Cruise movie. I know what the quality is, what the expectations are. And, to a certain extent, also like Schwarzenegger, Stallone, these people are like, you have certain expectations that go with that. And that started to become the branding. So Marvel, I go to a Marvel film, I know what to expect. Interestingly enough, I think we're weirdly kind of starting to maybe veer out of that again, because it was really interesting I was listening to a podcast that was talking about Dune 2 and how you're like, it's almost this kind of graduation point for a bunch of people of that generation, Florence Pugh, Timothée Chalamet, Zendaya, a lot of these people who are starting to weirdly become slightly more branded, bankable names again. Like if you also look at the success of, say, someone like Anyone But You with like Glenn Powell and Sydney Sweeney, I think there's an interesting element to which some of these things are becoming. We're starting to see this existence of more bankable people again. Like Zendaya's got this movie Challengers. It'll be interesting to see how that does. Sydney Sweeney, as far as I'm aware, I think her horror movie Immaculate, but I don't know when the podcast is coming out, but it's like, I don't know, it's probably old news. But, that's certainly been doing well as a kind of Sydney Sweeney vehicle. And I think Marvel is kind of at a point now where people are like, okay, show me what else you got now. So I don't know. I think it's interesting. I think we could be going into a slight
in a tipping point. Tipping point.
Yeah.
Whereas up until now, for like basically the last decade, it's been more IP, comic book heroes, all that kind of stuff. We can only hope that things are shifting. I don't know.
I mean, I would guess in the independent sector, one of the reasons why I used to work in film finance. So one of the reasons why maybe having a particular name wouldn't necessarily add anything or add as much is that pre-sales have dropped massively. So before you'd have a script and say, I've got X name attached to it, so you can get a load of pre-sales, therefore you can get your film off the ground. And now more and more, people watch the film when it's finished and then they sell it. So therefore, if it's a great film without necessarily that talent, you can sell that film because it's a great film. So I think the decline in pre-sales has massively influenced that.
I agree with you, definitely. One of the things, because we just came out of a film festival where we also did some industry days, one of the things, the ways in which sales agents and just sales agents, but they have a distribution arm as well. The way that they're changing around things is in order to maintain more control, as they might come on a project much earlier, at which point they'll also try and get that star vehicle in there to help with pre-sales. But as you say, that's limited, so they'll often end up looking for other financing. So co-production happens a lot more as well in that sense. So there's either people coming on board really, really early to help develop it and shape it so that they know that they can market it on the other end, or you make your movie like we have and you finish it and then they go, okay, now we'll look at it and decide if we want to buy it, basically. Yeah.
Well, I think the interesting thing is, I think, in terms of what we're looking at, in terms of like the old fashioned idea of movie stars or like IP, essentially what it boils down to is guarantors. You're trying to say, when you're looking at an audience, what is the audience's guarantor? They're looking at this and they're going like, this is the thing that guarantees my experience when I watch it. This is what I know. And to some people, like, because were in a meeting where somebody was talking about like a movie about a killer animal. I can't say what it was because it was privileged information, but like that notion of that killer animal was the thing that was actually the guarantor, as the thing that audiences will flock to or have info or has some sort of cross genre pollination, which makes people go, I'm going to have an interest in that. And that used to be movie stars. That was for a long time superheroes or kind of like IP. But it's interesting to see how that's going to develop and change in terms of what people look as their guaranteed experience in a film.
Yeah, some people it's directors, some people it's the studio like A24. If you might just go see it because A24 are releasing it. Yeah, and me, for sure.
I'm curious what you think the rise of social media stars like Mr. Beast will be on that. Because, I mean, he's getting hundreds of millions of views per video, more than Super Bowl commercials. And Whereas movie stars in the kind of 60s, 70s, 80s were able to protect their private life so much more because they couldn't just distribute any aspect of their day in the way that you can in the modern world. And I think that allowed for a sense of mystery that was part of why the movie star was so bankable. And I think the fact that's been lost has been part of why they correspondingly have become less powerful. And I remember in your short film with the models that you'd rested the phone on a book by Robert Greene, and one of the ideas Robert Greene has explored was Napoleon was a big believer in limiting access to him. So, for example, he would only go to the theatre once per month, so that if he was then out in public in that way, it would be an event that people could see Napoleon. And he very much felt that if he was allowed himself to be seen kind of on a common basis, it would reduce his prestige. Whereas nowadays we live so far the other way that I remember when Oppenheimer was out, that it was a news story that Cillian Murphy didn't have social media. And, you know, you've spoken about the resurgence of the movie star, but as people can now create content and share aspects of their lives so much easier than ever before, like you don't need a marketing company, you don't need a PR person to put out information into the world. It just feels like that's going to mean that there is now more competition for celebrity, for attention, than there's ever been before.
Interesting one, because I think that there's been this kind of strange way in which, if you talk about someone like Mr. Beast, there's been this strange way in which, the film industry has tried to flirt and figure out how to co-opt YouTube or social media into sort of success. We went to see a film called Divinity while we were in LA. It was a special screening, and one of the people in it was Bella Thorne. And Bella Thorne was clearly in this movie because of her social media presence. I know she was an actress in Disney and stuff like that, but obviously her social media presence is a big part of why they've tried to find this small role to put her in, because it's going to hopefully push things in other directions. But it was really interesting because I remember this. There was a TV show that was done by one of the producers of Project Greenlight. It's called The Chair, and they gave the same script to two filmmakers, and they both made their own indie films with it. And one of the filmmakers was Shane Dawson. And so it was who's a OG YouTuber. And it was kind of this weird almost experiment in that moment of going like, is there a crossover between YouTube content and serious filmmaking? And the really interesting thing was when they then premiered the film didn't do great unless... it didn't sell tickets unless Shane Dawson was going to show up at the screening. So that all his fans would show up to the film if Shane Dawson was going to be there. They weren't interested in just watching the film on its own. And, you saw things like the Smosh movie and a lot of movies where people tried to use YouTubers as... And so I don't know if the future of cinema is really necessarily one where social media people are going to be able to breed success in it. I think
but at the same time, also to answer your question about the mystery, I guess, which I think was something you were trying to touch on, is that I think it's hard to make a decision, I think, especially when you're an actor. I think you have a little bit more flexibility when you're filmmakers, because I definitely am not the kind of person who likes to live vlog their day. But then there are people who do that, and you've seen the guys who made Talk to Me, they came from a YouTube
Raka, yeah.
So there's all sorts, but it's more to say, speaking to that mystery aspect with Cillian Murphy, I think he has the freedom to do that because he's already established, whereas I do wonder what it's like for the younger generation in that sense, because I don't know if you know this, but I came from an acting background originally, so I studied at a drama school and then moved into filmmaking while I was still at drama school, to be honest. But I know what that feels like. And I was always like, oh God, do I have to be more extroverted in order to make it? And is this even the right place for me? And there are a lot of different types of actors, and some of it works in a particular type of person's favor. And it can be very difficult to not feel like you have to force yourself to be someone that you're not. I promise that it's probably in the long run better to not push yourself to be someone that you're not. It can feel uncomfortable, but as far as my experience has gone so far, I'm really I flirted with it every so often. I'm like, this is not working. Like I've done a couple reels and I'm like, you know what? No, because the whole reason I got into acting was because I didn't really like being myself in the first place. Like I liked playing other people. I could never be a presenter, basically. So with filmmaking, I'm like, okay, no, I'm just going to be myself and do my thing and let the work speak for me. And I know that there are actors who are like that too, but I don't know how well the world is currently serving those types of actors.
I tried to at one point do a behind the scenes kind of reel during the making of the film and got laughed at by several people on set who I got a very much an okay boomer kind of. I didn't even end up posting it. It was just like it just felt like. It was during the model photo shoot. So we had a pre-production shoot that was for like all of these photos that appear in the film, which is like the character's like past life where she was in a punk band. So we got a bunch of friends together. We formed this fake band and we kind of like did all these like faux behind the scenes sort of photos. And yeah, it was Ava and Rachel. They laughed at me. Like not in a like a malicious way, just in a more bemused way. But it's just like it definitely wasn't like an easy fit for me to be, hey, we're just hanging out on the set here, we're getting ready to make a film, you know. It's just like, yeah, just
get the impression as well that there is a bit of a generational divide between that sort of more YouTubey, I'm all out there performing, whereas like let's say people under 18, the energy tends to be going more in the direction of, oh, you're taking a photo of me? Oh, I'm just casually looking over here.
Yes.
I don't even care.
I feel like a douchebag when I try and take a photo of myself at the gym. Like I feel like a dumbass when I do that. But like I like brazenly, like we were at the gym yesterday. There's just a guy who'd set up a tripod and was just like, I'm just here like casually doing, you know, this exercise. And, you know, I'm kind of like, to me, I would feel like such a dumbass, like taking up space doing that. But clearly, like, he doesn't give a fuck. So it's just like, it's a different mental kind of thing.
It's very interesting. I mean, there's definitely, you know, you see the way clips are being made and like adverts have been more like authentic, which I always think is really cringy, but like getting that authentic energy while still performing, like I'm like, that balance is tricky, but I think it's really interesting to see how things are shifting. And I just think everything's changing all the time. So to sort of come back to your question, I guess, is like, even marketplace wise, everyone just is in a bit of a scramble trying to figure out like, well, what are the models? Who are we even trying to appeal to anymore? Because I feel like everything is shifting all the time. AVOD, so for those who don't know, advertising models are getting stronger at the moment because I think people panicking and they're putting things on Tubi and they're like, well, at least we can get some money from this while we try and figure out how we do still get money from making movies, essentially. But we've been talking a lot about how we think the film industry is now where the music industry.
Yeah, I think we're basically kind of like I think the film industry is kind of at a point where post Napster, the music industry just kind of going like, okay, we're not selling CDs. How the fuck do we make money? And I think that was the thing, is like, we don't realize how much we lived in a fucking golden era in like the 2000s with like the DVDs. Like it was just because like part of it was like you could commit to this idea of, okay, I'm making like this $20 million movie that's a bit of a risk, but you know what, if it doesn't do well theatrically, it'll make its money back on DVD sales. And that just doesn't exist anymore. Streaming does not make up that sort of that. And you know, you go to like the American film market, or you go to, you know, Alix was at the European film market, and it's like people are talking like it's the last days of Rome. Like everybody's just kind of like, you got to get while the getting's good because the whole thing's coming down. So it's like, and I get it. I think these things will always pivot or change. There'll be new ways that sort of like dynamics of how people figure it out. But it's, you know, I think we're going to have to really rethink some of the models of what, you know, we're doing at the moment.
But I think that's exactly why being idiosyncratic with the work that you create is even more important than ever, because you can't compete with the $200 million ghost movie. So don't make a generic ghost movie. Make something that's you, like unequivocally. Because one of the things, like, we spoke about it before we started recording. I hope you don't mind me referencing that. But, you know, in a way, like in the most basic of terms, like you could see Kill Your Lover as being a mashup of Wretch and Sucker, which is sort of the more body horror vibes, with Portrait, the more dramatic side of things. So in Portrait, for instance, you see a photo wall, sort of showing the wider world beyond what's going on in the actual film to show like the past and present of some of the characters.
Sorry, just for the benefit of the audience, those are your three of your short films that you've made prior to the feature.
Exactly. And so it's like that thing where we've taken elements that we know are strong suits of ours, stuff that we've done before, but also stuff that we feel comfortable with, and we've brought all of those together with the body horror aspects and some of the VFX we used in the Creature feature shorts, and worked to our strengths, but also told a story that is singular to us rather than trying to make a copy of a copy. Because I think you have to be very precise if you are working at a low budget level and you're trying to establish yourself. You need to cut through the white noise. There's too many people making things. Well,
I mean, I think if you took the music industry analogy, you're going to be more interested in idiosyncratic, interesting little indie band than a band that is trying to sound like, the biggest sort of like generic pop stars of the day. You're going to become more interested in the things that feel more authentic and kind of, unusual.
I mean, it's not to say that it guarantees success, but at least then you're staying true to yourself. And then if it does take off, then you're in the right space. Whereas like if you, I don't know, say you want to make horror movies, but you make a rom-com, suddenly you've been pigeonholed. Like that's a very like broad sweeping, but similar to what you were saying about the music side of things is like, even if it isn't the most successful thing in the world, at least it's yours, and at least you're...
I suppose it's the thing where if you make a film that you would really enjoy, odds are, just because of the huge population of the planet, that there will be a number of people who will also really enjoy that. Because if you make something you think someone else might enjoy, you can get it completely wrong.
Well, I think we really came from the standpoint that we were like, we need to have something that we feel like we can really stand behind. If we're going to put this much time and energy and money and, sacrifice a lot of kind of like, I'm not going to lie, sort of physical and mental health in making it, like we have to stand by it in the end. And if the thing that we came out with at the end was just kind of like, because so many people, when they try and make a first feature, they essentially make what, it's like an almost fill in the gaps, like Mad Libs, like these are things that happen in a movie. Like there's no kind of personal, sort of like connection to it. And we really felt like this has to be a personal thing to us. Otherwise, we're not going to be, what's the point in putting ourselves through this?
I would say though, I just need to make a point. I think I try to rail against platitudes as much as I can. I will probably say platitudes, but I don't mean them. But I do think there's a common thing that people say, which is, oh, you should just make a movie that you would want to watch. You do need to think about other people. Like even if you're making something idiosyncratic, that's not to say that it should just be a movie that you and I would watch and go, oh, isn't that nice? Because you don't want to end up with...
You don't want to make a home movie.
Yeah.
It's like...
that's why
I also think...
I think it is super important, as well as making something specific that is specific to you and expresses who you are. It does still need to be outward.
And make it for an audience. Yeah.
I think we would definitely say that people sometimes use it as an excuse for laziness, is that they don't put the work in to properly sort of like put together a satisfying narrative arc and, sort of like dynamic characters, because they go, well, we just like lots of stupid shit, so we just throwing a lot of stupid shit in here, and it's like, if you don't like it, then you're taking it too serious. It's like that, it's like respect yourself.
Yeah, so if we just take horror as an example, because we did make a horror movie at the end of the day, like, if you just make a movie going, oh, well, I just like the idea of having a bunch of kills and they're cool kills and I think they're cool, and not thinking beyond that, then I don't know what, you're trying to say. I think the point of view, I think, is the most important.
Look, you can go onto Amazon and just flick through the wasteland of just horrible, cheap, cynically made shit where a lot of the people don't give a crap about the thing they're making, and they make like 50 movies a year, and they're just kind of like, and they're all shit, and they don't pay the people that they're working with well, and they treat them like shit. And it's like, and there's some kind of clear small market for that sort of thing, but ultimately, life's too short. Why bother?
And this may be a platitude, but it's just from my standpoint, it's you can make what you want to make, but you have to make it the best you can make it. Yeah. And so often with the wasteland, it's either, I think this is going to be commercial, so let's just do it, but I'm not really passionate about it, so let's just get it done. Or I'm going to make what I want to make, but I'm not actually going to really bare my soul in like rewrite this script 30 goddamn times and like think about the shot. And like you guys talked about how much pre-prep you did. And so I think a lot of that where it's like, well, I made what I wanted to make. And it's like, yeah, but how hard did you, like, how much of yourself did you give? Because you guys referenced how much of your physical and mental health making this took from you. And it's, at least from my standpoint, I think it's a lot of people don't understand. It's like, go and make the thing that means something to you, because life's really short. Like this past weekend, I spent my father's ashes, so it's given me an appreciation of time short. And if you're going to go do something, really go do it. Like, don't half-ass a dream.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, just my condolences, and
Thank you.
My dad passed away in 2020. And so I understand that. And I was literally saying to you last night, I was like, no, we're both going to go to New Orleans and like really stand behind this movie and like do everything we can, because we don't know what's going to happen in 5 years.
Yeah.
And so I, like, from a similar perspective, I completely.
And I think it's just really interesting because, anytime you go to networking stuff, you go to that, there's always a bunch of people there who they've clearly like been waiting for 20 something years for somebody to walk up to them and say, hey, let's make your film. And it's just not going to happen. You're not going to have somebody who's just, you have to be the one to do it. And then when you do it, you got to care about it. Like, otherwise you're just going to have a miserable time, and it's going to be, it's going to be a miserable experience.
I wonder if we could go therefore back to the origins of Kill Your Lover, and in real sense of like the practical steps of, okay, you want to make a feature film, you want to find an idea that you're passionate about. What was that first step? How did you start developing the script? Could you talk us through that?
Well, I think,
if you don't
yeah,
mind
go for it.
Jumping in, it's, we had already started developing a slate. We had been writing feature film treatments basically from when we did the anthology in 2020 onwards, because we were like, we should really start thinking about this. We were developing feature film ideas, but they were all really, expensive, at least, for what we were looking at as people who weren't established. So 5 mil at least, if not more. And we're like, well, we've set ourselves too high a goalpost at this point. So I think that was it, with that previous experience of thinking about what kind of subject matters we were interested in, we then went, okay, well, what can we, if we had to, what could we shoot in our own flat with actors we know, with a DSLR camera, because that's what we just own at home. We've done all of this before. Maybe that's what we go with, because that was the initial plan. The initial plan was just, we'll see what happens, but we'll just go with what we have. And then thankfully, as we started building it, people started joining in, and people were like, that does sound quite cool, actually. So we were just thinking, like a lot of people would advise, is single location, small amount of cast. In our way, we were ambitious with what we were doing with the practical effects. I'm not sure I would recommend that to everyone, but because we'd had the experience of taking that from development through to post-production with Sucker, for instance, we felt quite confident that we could pull off these simple yet not so simple practical effects. So again, working to our strengths. So to go from start to finish is when we had that film festival thing, we already were kind of like, okay, whatever we've already got, we've got to go much, much smaller, just think as small as we possibly can, and build from there. So in terms of practical steps, obviously the script came first, and then I think everyone's journey is different. We've always been very actor-led, and in a way, Keir did say this is true as well, is in the past as well, I've definitely trapped myself into a project by casting. So I'll like approach actors, we'll talk about it, they get excited about it, which gets us excited about it, and we're like, okay, well, we already have part of the team. Oh, yeah, I guess this is happening then, we've got to make it happen. And then kind of go from there. So that's what gets me going, is like casting, working with actors. And then we're like, okay, well, how do we make this practically happen? So we were looking at shooting in our own flat at one point. We were looking at shooting with our own camera at one point. But then we were like, you know what? It would be great to interview some DPs. So we interviewed, after the cast, we started interviewing DPs in February, I think it was. We found someone that we were like, oh, we can actually really work with this person. So then we were like, oh, they have their own camera and everything, so I guess we've leveled up. And then we just kept doing that with, like, bit by bit. We were like, well, ideally we wouldn't shoot in our own flat because we know our flat too well, noise issues, blah, blah, blah. So let's see if we can find a good location.
We also didn't have a big enough bathroom, and that was like, and that was the biggest challenge.
We were going to recast the bathroom. I think we were thinking, well, maybe we could, I don't know, just shoot one of our friends' bathrooms for that scene or what have you. So I think that's it, is like, that's how we practically approached it. Is just sort of just build it step by step. I don't know if there's anything.
Well, I think there's some very interesting things that people undervalue a little bit. So, you know, if you're, I think that there's this notion of you film something in one location, or it's a one location thing, therefore it's inherently cheap. And I think that people also miss the opportunities that can come from that. So you know, for me personally, I love Hitchcock, and, you know, Hitchcock can do a lot with like a single space, you know, it's like and I think that people also miss the notion of, they think of effects, but they also miss, or, you know, they think of action and they think these are big, expensive things, but actually, you know, there are ways that you can do these in interesting, cost-effective ways. And tension, drama, all of these things come down to execution. They can be executed in very, very cheap ways. And you can make, you know, if you're looking at, say, like, I don't know, like we're really big fans of Brian De Palma. Like, Brian De Palma can make like a simple action the biggest, most elongated, most tense thing. It's like somebody just approaching someone can feel massive. And it's all about how you shoot things. And I think that was something that we became very aware of, is like standoffs, like tension, you know, that build to things. That's how you make the film feel cinematic and massive, not through kind of like big spectacle or like big locations. It's through how the characters are interacting with each other and what those moments mean. And I think so that was what we really tried to build into this script a lot more, was these moments where characters had like, you know, real, you know, sort of moments of elongated tension, or big dramatic, you know, sort of like conundrums and things like that, you know. It's I think that there's always ways to do these things in interesting, dynamic ways that aren't just, you know, yeah, sure, you know, we're just shooting something cinema verite in a flat. Yeah, it's just probably going to feel small. But if you try and build it into a more dynamic story, you can do more with that.
I think one of the best compliments we got so far from the feature film, from Kill Your Lover, is that, you know, you read, oh, it's all set in one flat. There are going to be a lot of people who go, oh, turned off, don't want to do that. Seen that a million times. One of the best compliments we've received so far is that the movie is cinematic as fuck, is I believe quote, which was amazing to receive, because basically the person said, and they knew what the budget was, and they were like, you know, about halfway through the film, I completely forgot about any budget restraints, because it doesn't feel like it's got those budget restraints. And that's why we storyboarded the shit out of it, because we were like, you know what, we could do all of the coverage, but our approach, our personal approach, which might not suit everyone, but our personal approach is shoot the specials first.
Well, shoot
the coverage, shoot the specials first. Producers would hate that. There's a reason that, you know, we produced this movie, and we were quite free with that. But now we have something that proves that our approach works.
I was going to say, it's the difference between shooting a really boring film in a single space and a really interesting film in a single space. It's not the single space, it's whether it's a good or not good script. And the execution of it.
For the audience who don't know what specials means and why producers wouldn't like that, could you go into a little bit?
Well, I think there's a kind of like, we're very allergic to what we call coverage, which is, coverage is the way most standard films are done, which is that you have your establishing shots, you have your mediums on individual characters, shot, reverse shot, you have your close-ups, and then you'll have your inserts for kind of like specific actions or important things. And then you'll have what's called your specials, which are usually a conceptual or more kind of like stylized, approach to it. But people usually go from the standpoint, if you shoot coverage, then the idea is that you are covered in all kind of facets for the edit.
Yeah,
However,
safety.
It's safety.
Which
but
producers love.
But and I'm just speaking for myself here, and I think Alix would agree with me, but my big problem with coverage is that actually I think coverage is very cost and time ineffective, because I think you end up shooting a lot of material you don't need, and because there is no real design to how the scene works, when you get to the edit, it's all kind of like you're just kind of marrying a whole bunch of stuff up with very little kind of like personality or much of an artistic approach as to how you make it. And whereas we would always go from the standpoint of we want to film the specials first with the idea that there is some kind of plan that we can build in for if there is an issue and that we can cut back to in some kind of a way. But it actually means that ultimately you're executing a smaller amount of shots well, rather than kind of just going through the motions of doing like tons of shots that you don't need. Because the reality is, like, by the time you've done like 5 establishing, I don't know, 5, mediums, and then the close-ups, like they've already like done the scene like 8, 9 times at that point, whereas we've already moved on by that point.
Coverage is more important for films where you haven't done all that prep, because if you're kind of like, I'm unsure of the scene, then you just get more coverage.
When we have an extended 2-shot in our film, which is where we looked at the scene and we kind of was like, this is really a scene that's about like the dramatic discomfort between these two actors and between these two characters. We're like, it's actually better to just kind of be able to breathe and like feel the awkward energy in it, and that's going to be done a lot more through the performances. So, Alix in particular, because Alix is very much the actor maestro out of the two of us, you rehearsed the actors, you got them into a really good spot where they were like really ready to do that scene. And so we did that scene in one point of coverage, because it was very time effective, and it's the sort of scene that would have taken all day if we had to do it in coverage, but there was no point in doing it in coverage. We just chose the right method with which to do that scene, rather than just like leave it up to the editor to figure out later.
Yeah, which is also super interesting, because if you watch our short films, like we do have more, I guess you could say, in a shorthand, a Tony Scott sort of fractured, quite quickly edited style. So doing an extended scene, I mean, the scene is 3.5 minutes long. It's an unbroken take for 3.5 minutes, which for us is actually quite unusual. So I just wanted to draw attention to the fact that that's actually quite in contrast to what we would normally do. But I think you have to choose what makes the most sense for the film, but also what makes the most sense for each individual scene. And because we do have all of that sort of more fast-paced stuff, you do also need to have those little islands to breathe as well, because I think that was one of the things that people were kind of curious about when they said, well, when you make a feature film, it's just going to be like Hardcore Henry. It's just going to be insane for like an hour and a half. And you're like, no. We do know how to like, do the peaks and valleys.
Pace it, yeah.
That's really important. But I did want to make sure to point out blocking as well, because I think that's a really underrated skill and thing that people don't really think about. Like, again, you think about the coverage, it's like shoulder. Whereas I think you can get a lot out of mid coverage.
Mid. I don't know what you're saying.
Well, I'm talking about the moving in scene.
Oh yeah.
Where you had a bit of movement, where we just talked about character dynamics and them having a bit of freedom to move in the space, and just make it feel more lived in, rather than this sort of more like very sterile sort of approach that we come across a lot.
Well, and I think the really interesting thing is, we've been to a lot of horror festivals. We've seen a lot of, sort of like low budget indie movies. And, I think one of the things that we find is a really common issue, is that every film, there's so many films where there's no attention paid to the blocking, and like literally every scene starts with somebody walks into the room, there's another person in the room, they sit down, and then they talk for 5 minutes of unbroken shot versus shot reverse shot, where it's just like, it doesn't matter what they're saying, nothing changes in the coverage, nothing goes differently, the characters aren't actually doing anything in terms of their actions, like it's just two people talking dialogue at each other for 5 minutes with no real kind of like, with no attention to what the visuals or what the language of the film is doing. And I'm not even saying like you need to like do crazy shots or something like that, but it's like, you know, what could the characters be doing in the scene? What could they be interacting with? What could they be looking at? What are the things that are giving them giving more potency to their words? You know, how are you framing their conversation with each other?
I think the simplest way I would kind of point it out is to say, you know, where are the characters coming from and where are they going to at the beginning and the end of the scene? Because you want to make a character feel more lived in. They've got urges and objectives beyond just the scene that they're in. And I think that's something that's missing a lot from the urgency of a lot of scenes.
It's also, how do you introduce your character? Like, what is the meaning with which you see the character for the first time? What is the context that you're giving the audience through that introduction? How do you move from scene to scene? This is one of our big things, is that people really undervalue the importance of good transitions and how you move from one scene to the other and you create a sense of flow, you know, a sort of like a dynamic feel within the film. And I think that, you know, all of these things are the stuff that people, especially in the low budget indie sphere, sorely underrate, because I think they get into this very coverage mindset of every scene just needs to be kind of like covered.
I think the reason that happens though is because I think they think that that's how they're going to save money.
Yeah. Yeah, which
I understand. I definitely understand it.
I watched a film, you know, I'm not going to name it, but it had like 6 or 7 people sitting around a table. And it's terrible because the scene is terrible because every single actor has individual coverage. So you're cutting between constantly like 7 different characters within the scene. And it's so choppy because it can't kind of like, you know, it doesn't have anything where it kind of moves the camera, have multiple people. It doesn't use the blocking. Like, because if you know what character's doing in the scenes, you can choose who you're sitting next to where, or have them placed in different parts of the scene, or find different ways of framing it or doing it. Like the perfect one is like one of my favorite movies of all time is John Carpenter's The Thing. And if you ever want to watch a film that so perfectly understands how to get a ton of people around a table and shoot it well, that is a movie that knows how to do that. But it's but the problem was,
I just want to point out, you've really got us going. So if you want to talk, if you want to ask us other questions, do just stop us because we can talk.
Just finish that
fantastic.
Point. Just to finish that point though, it's like, so then I said to the guy, I was like, this is really choppy. Like, and he was like, oh yeah, well, we only had half a day. I'm like, to film that scene. I'm like, that scene is actually so much long. Like the fact that you filmed 7 points of individual coverage in that scene is entirely not time effective. Like, it's like you could have actually blocked this and done this far more effectively if you hadn't had that much coverage in it. And that's where coverage becomes a problem.
It's interesting. It reminds me of what we were talking about earlier with social media influencers and YouTubers and stuff. And I suppose that format, they tend to cut quite fast and quite often. And actually it kind of shows the difference in skill sets between maybe a feature film and making YouTube content, and why maybe it might not transition from one to the other so easily.
Well, I think there's an interesting logic gap as well, because it's like, just because someone's talking doesn't mean they're the most important thing in the scene. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the interesting thing, is like, as from a narrative perspective, what is the most important thing in the scene? It's not necessarily getting a close up of the person.
That's so true. I mean, really, really random example, but it's just made me think. We love Steven Soderbergh, but he has a TV show that only ran for 2 seasons that I love called The Nick. And that one is just a beautiful example. Like, I just remember there's this whole scene that plays out and like everyone else is talking, but we're looking at one person just reacting to it all. And as the audience member, that is the most important person to see in the scene, because you're like, you know what's going on with him while all of this is happening. And I just think it's fascinating. He'll do really long takes as well, which I think was some of the inspiration for like some of the scenes in Kill Your Lover as well. So I have a lot of respect for someone who knows when not to do something.
And the ultimate master of this is Spielberg. Like the Spielberg oneer is like the most like perfect.
A quiet oneer.
Yeah, a quiet one. And that's the beauty of it, because there's so much showy one-shot takes that are really stupid. And, you know, there are, you know, and I also have a real thing. I really tend to dislike like one take movies because I'm almost always, they don't justify why they need to be one take narratively. They always feel like forced. So it's kind of that thing of like, but the beauty of Spielberg is that he's not doing it for show. It's just a natural way to block and move the actors in this way that feels very organic. And then the beauty of it is if he needs to cut in for a close-up, he will. Because the point is not that it's one shot. It's actually just creating a good flowing organic scene.
I mean, there's so much for directors to learn from you guys. It's amazing.
Sorry,
I
this
was just wondering if we
No,
could...
sorry. No, I was just going to say, absolutely fucking phenomenal. Like,
Thank you. We just talk about this shit all the time. We're just like, railing against the machine.
It's very clear, and we will link to Switchblade Cinema, which is your company, and your shorts are on it. But it's so clear in Portrait that it was the writing and directing is what really made that, you know, so powerful to watch. And it's clear, obviously, that you guys know how to direct really well. And we haven't yet seen Kill You Lover because it's on the festival circuit, but can't wait to.
yeah, absolutely.
Sure. I was wondering whether we could talk, because you talked about getting the script written and then approaching a DP, well, after the cast, approaching a DP and getting all that sort of off the ground. Would you be open to talking about the funding? I know you said you crowdfunded some of it. When you interacted with that DP, did you negotiate a fee with them, or did they come on board before a fee and then you worked that in later on?
So,
how does that kind of come together?
I think with each individual crew member that we kind of had a different conversation. So I'll just take the DP as an example. So with the DP, this was someone we didn't know at all before. So this was a Mandy casting situation. So we definitely put a fee up on the site as like, you know, sort of like an introductory, and then sort of said in the notes, like, would need to be discussed, all this kind of thing, because we, you know, you don't want to like not be able to guarantee people. And again, your reputation is everything. So that's very important to us. So I think we put a fee, a nominal fee up, but then met with a couple people. And then once we'd found the person that we were like, yes, we want to work with this person, we then discussed it with them independently, and sort of worked it out from there. So at that point, we were we had just been doing crowdfunding, and we were very clear from the start that this was going to be, you know, quite low budget, and that we were just trying to do our best with everything that we had. And because of the work that we'd done before, we could show that we would be able to deliver the goods and like finish the damn thing, which is everything.
There's a lot of talking in the industry where
Yes.
people say they're going to do something or have an idea for something and it drops away. So that's why you were talking earlier, it's like the momentum of actually doing something.
And
really
having the backup.
and having the backup of the shorts.
Yeah, I think that was really important. And I think, you know, we had, like, Oscar is brilliant, and we love him to bits.
Yeah, I
He's
should
such
just say Oscar Garth is the name of our cinematographer, and he is,
Oscar Garth,
yeah, he's an absolute dream. Like, I've never met a cinematographer who complained as little as he did. And it was like to the point where on one of the days I actually said to him, "Do you like? Is there anything you want to like
Share?
share? Because you know we're not giving you a lot of resources here, so you know it's like, is there anything you want to like talk to us about?"
Yeah, that man performed miracles. He had basically one, you know, gaffer / spark / everyman. It was a 2-man camera team for the entire thing. It was nuts what they did with what they had, and we're very grateful for them, both Oscar and Connor. But I just wanted to say, to finish the point, is you know, that was just very lucky for us, because we met someone who understood our approach and energy, and we just matched. And so we were just incredibly fortunate on that front. So I think because he ended up caring about the project as much as we did, that was a really good example of, he just said, look, I'm cool, we'll figure it out, and whatever you can give me, we'll make it happen, because I want to do this. So that, you know, every relationship is different, but for the most part, we built a team of those people, which, you know, we're very lucky, but it also takes time.
It's interesting too, because I think you have to find people that match your sensibilities. In a lot of ways. So it's like, so we interviewed a lot of people, and we interviewed some very talented people. And, you know, we had some people who were really, really keen on the idea. They really liked the idea of making a horror movie. And I think part of it was they were interested in the idea of making a horror movie because it was like a thing that has like room for a lot of like visual panache, you know. So that was kind of like, so they were interested in that as a notion. But the really interesting thing about Oscar is like what kind of really clinched it for us was he made he was the DP for a short film called The Foul, which is where this short film where a guy's dog shits on the pavement and then he leaves it and then it comes to life as this kind of giant talking turd that like attacks him and starts stalking
Hate it
him.
when that happens.
Yeah.
Just a man in a poo suit.
And it's also like
Right.
it's one that's just got like a really dynamic and kinetic shooting style to it. And the funny thing was, we were having a conversation. I was talking to him about how I liked it, and he, you know, I was saying like I really liked this moment in it, and he said, "Oh yeah, well that was actually my idea because I said it would be funny if, say, like he sits up in bed, then goes back down, and then comes back up in a shot. If we just hold on the shot long enough for him to come in and
rather
out.
than cutting.
And you know, and it's a real principle of both horror and comedy that, you know, things coming into or out of the frame are dynamic. You know, they have some inherent sort of narrative or storytelling value to them. So the fact that a DP was thinking about how something coming in and out of the frame in order to get maximum comic effect out of it, the fact that the DP was thinking about that, you know, was something that really intrigued us, because so much of the time when you're talking to a DP, most of what they're talking about is they're talking about the lighting, they're talking about the frame, and they, you know, the idea that he was thinking creatively really fascinated us.
Yeah. To bring it back to the financing, though, because I do think that was something that you were interested in, is so we started off with crowdfunding, and that I think was good in the sense that we got seed money, but I will say that it does take off a lot of effort, and you have to know that, like, because we were directing, producing, writing, you ended up editing the whole thing. We were doing everything ourselves. Also the crowdfunding, it was just the two of us. And even though that ended up being good for seed money, ultimately I ended up investing some of my own money. And then as the crowdfunding went on, we happened to be introduced to an investor because of the crowdfunding campaign, but it was through a friend. And so we had one other investor that joined us, who we love to bits, James, who came on as an executive producer as well. And that was really the big lesson for us, to realize that we had been underselling ourselves in terms of the confidence that we just needed to approach investors. Because James was more of an angel investor in the sense that he was just really interested in making a horror movie specifically, and we just happened to meet him at the right time. So that's not just going to happen automatically. But I think what I wish I'd known before we started the crowdfunding campaign, just because it took up so much effort and time, and then you're mostly asking friends and family for help, is I thought I had to have some massive, crazy experience of financing movies, when really, like, there are people out there, investors included, who just want to make cool stuff. And it's about maybe investing that time that you're putting into a crowdfunder into trying to find investors who just want to make cool stuff. And I think it's more, I had kind of vaguely heard about this through someone else, is one way that you could do that is to say, go through LinkedIn. And that's, I haven't done that myself yet, but it's probably, essentially what I'm trying to say is that if I was to look to make another movie in the same way that we made Kill Your Lover, I would probably go and try and find private investors rather than doing a crowdfunding campaign. That being said, we're looking to level up. So we're looking at co-productions and stuff like that. But if I was making Kill Your Lover again,
I'm just gonna put it very, very bluntly. Crowdfunding fucking sucks. It's like it's a fantasy. It's a fantasy world. It's similar in the same way to what I was talking about the guy who's gonna sit in the back and see your short and come up with a cigar and tell you like it's gonna fucking fund your movie. It's the same with crowdfunding. Is people have this sort of strange notion that out there's just kind of like a bunch of people just sitting on crowdfunding sites going, what shall I fund this week? It doesn't work that way. Most of what you're going to be doing is asking your parents, your friends, your family, your fucking dog, you know, to give you like a tenner. That is what most of you, and you are going to be chasing people down, and you are going to feel horrible. You're going to feel like a lame scrounger. And if you're willing to do that, then cool. But don't think you're going to make 50 grand doing that, because it's just not.
I would say 90% of crowdfunding campaigns go like that now. It's not new. It's not fresh anymore. And
yeah, it was cute like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
But
I did it once for a short, and it was so exhausting. I was like, never again.
No.
Yeah. And so it's not to say that it can't work. There are people who are professional crowdfunders and they have got it down to a freaking T. We did not. And that was, that's fine. I can admit that.
And any crowdfunding that is super successful, either that person has some kind of built-in audience, or look, there's social media people have huge followings. If they wanted to crowdfund something, they could probably do it. Like our friend Mike, who runs Evolution of Horror, like they just crowdfunded something. They've got a great built-in audience. They're going to do that. Then they go into that crowdfunding knowing that there's a good chance they'll be able to do that.
There's an animated show called Vox Machina. Do you know that?
Yes.
one?
Yeah.
Amazon. So that was crowdfunded from a D&D podcast.
Yeah.
And they had the audience.
That's what you need. But if you are just some person, you don't have a built-in audience of any sort, you are not going to do that unless you happen to know some very rich people who are just going to like be part of it anyway. But then I would just kind of be like, if you know rich people, and just ask them.
Don't go through the site and don't pay 5%.
Yeah.
But Daniel, I think you had a question.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to draw down on how much money did you make from the crowdfunding?
From the crowdfunder, 15K. Yeah, but then we invested a whole bunch,
which was ultimately seed money. Like we don't reveal what the official budget of the film was.
Cool. No worries.
I would say that the crowdfunder was ultimately just seed money for what the overall budget.
And we're very grateful for that money that we got, because it was ultimately a necessary step.
Here's a really important thing that I think also people need to know as well, because this is the thing that fucks up so many people in terms of independent cinema, is they don't think beyond the shoot. They go like, oh, I've budgeted up until the moment we say rap, and then they don't think about the cost of editing. They don't think about the sound. The sound
is key, people.
But also these days, you're probably going to need some effects to kind of like to clear up people's like skin, to do all sorts of like to correct things. Radio mics are a pain in the ass, so you'll probably need to like, and as much as you think you're paying attention, you'll probably miss them somewhere. And
festival submissions, that's always a big one people forget.
Yeah, but I would say
also you'll need, if you sell to any kind of sales agency, you're going to need a lawyer to go through that sales contract.
I was just going to say, Imozu ASMR style, very unsexy delivery as part of post-production, and no one talks about it because they don't like talking about it. That comes after the editing and the sexy sound production stuff, and it's like, holy moly, it's a whole other ball game in feature film terms in particular. Like with short film, we got away with like doing all kinds of stuff because the stakes are not as high, but not going into all of it, but ultimately, it took me probably 3 months to do all of the delivery stuff myself. You're talking about all the paperwork, which I thankfully already done. Again, fix it in prep. But we're talking about things like subtitling, closed captions, all of the stuff. If you're going to sell your movie, like they're going to be asking for E&O insurance, expensive as hell.
So for the audience, it's basically delivery is a list of deliverables. So it's everything that they're asking you to give so that they can then show or screen that film in whatever market they're filming, or
it's also selling it to territories, giving it, it's like selling it to Germany so that they can translate it.
Have all the copyright in the film, for example.
This is another important thing that I think really is like that we actually did really well, and people were very impressed by, which is we got contracts on everything, and people really undervalue that. And then as soon as the sales company comes around, it's like, where's the contracts for we had all of them. The other thing we did was we made sure that we had releases on basically everything. So if there was there's a t-shirt brand in there, we made sure we had a release on that. If there was an image in the background that we didn't have a release on, we took it out. It's like, and that can screw so many people over, where they've featured this thing that they don't have the rights to use.
I would say we spent about a quarter of our, all things considered meager budget on sound, special effects makeup, and then on the tail end, this was mostly me putting the money into this, but deliverables was like a sizable portion of that, especially the E&O insurance, which is ostensibly errors and omissions. That's what that stands for, which is, again, like covering you to make sure that any brands or anything that's in the background, they make sure, they basically say whether or not you can make a profitable product from that without having to get any other releases.
Did you take that insurance out after the film then, so that you could sell to the market?
Yes. So what we were advised to do anyway was to not take that out until we had a deal on the table, because one of the things you do need to take into consideration is what specific things they're asking for, what kind of coverage.
And how long it is. And if you've already got the clock started because you did it in pre-production, you might have to extend it.
And again, people don't really talk about it because they're like, oh, boring. And you're like, yeah, but very vital.
Do you know also, I think we would both say that here's a little really good way to think about how you should utilize your budget. I had a film teacher at one point who drummed this into us, which is that mediocre images can always be saved by great sound. Great images will always be fucked by mediocre sound.
Yeah.
It's like if you want a place to really spend some of your budget, it's worth it to spend it on the sound design, because the sound design will sell so much of your movie.
Yeah. I mean, hands down, the biggest recommendation I would ever give. And that's what changed for us. Everything. The reason where we are now is because we made Wretch in 2018, and that's when we really started taking sound seriously, and I think it shows.
Can you talk a bit about how you attached the sales agent? So presumably you'd already shot the film, and then you got that in
We're
place.
a bit unusual in that we had a connect through a writing program that we did effectively. Right. And then this person who ran the writing program happened to be a part of a sales company. And so we had showed him a teaser of what we had shot so far. So we'd only shot block 1 at this point. And he said, okay, come back to me when you finish shooting it. And we were like, well, maybe you could give us some money to help finish it. And he's like, yeah, we'll see it when it's finished. And you're like, okay, fair enough.
And this is the important thing too, is that basically everybody in the industry, especially at this level, the thing that they're always going to look at is they're going to go like, yeah, but can you finish it? Mm. And that was like, so when, the executive producer of the film is a guy called Douglas Cox, who he produced Host and Dashcam, and we've known him for a long time. And he basically was like, yeah, attach my name and tell people I'm on board, because the thing is, at the end of the day, people will know that the film is going to get finished if I'm involved, because that's the thing that everybody questions. Because again, if you've shot it, great. Until we see the finished product, is it going to get finished? Do you have the money to finish it? Do you have the resources to finish it? That's the trick with all of this,
Yeah. But in terms of attaching the sales agent, we were very fortunate in that as soon as we essentially finished shooting the film, this person basically hounded us month after month for the first cut, which is quite unusual. So I just want to make sure that people know that that's kind of the exception. I think in terms
of to us at a screening, and
it was like,
was like hard pitching us at the screening. We love him. I'm sure he won't mind us sort of
because you were a known quantity to him. So
yeah,
whereas if you're not
years ago,
if
you're not a known quantity, then that's when you're more pitching to them.
What would normally happen is that we were basically planning on going to festivals, getting sales agent through that, get interest from that, get them to approach us, and then go through the process of selling the movie. That's what would normally happen if you've already made the entire film. Then they want to see it, see how well it's performing at film festivals, see what the reception is, and then maybe start approaching. So, we were in a position where even before we started going to festivals, we already knew we had a sales agent. So it's been very interesting to see who's been approaching us once the film has gone to festivals. You're kind of seeing what kind of level of person you're attracting. And I've had to go back to all of them and to essentially say, sorry, worldwide rights are already gone. Do you know what I mean? But normally that wouldn't be the case.
It's difficult too, because there's a lot of cowboys who just want content, and so they'll just
they'll put it somewhere.
Yeah. So they just want things to fill out the books and dump out there, and they're not going to put any real sort of effort into it. So it's so you do have to be careful, because it's just because not all sales companies are created the same, and so you got to look at reputations, what they've done in the past, and whether they can be relied on.
I think just because someone's written to you and seems enthusiastic, you don't need to go with your first option. And so I guess the problem is we're probably not gonna have that experience.
When we were, I think by the time It's not a secret, by the time, this podcast comes out, I think it'll play it at the festival and everything. So it's like, NPI, Dark Sky, who we're kind of with, they have a reputation that we're very aware of. So we kind of so we felt like we could sort of trust in what we were sort of and who we were going with there.
Well, we also asked around.
Yeah.
We were already feeling pretty secure and safe, but we still asked people who have sold their movie to them, because I think that's actually also more respectful to Dark Sky as well, that we make sure that we are happy with it.
It's a relationship between you
Absolutely.
and the sales agent.
So, but we asked 2 people that we trust, how's it been? You've been with them for 2 years now with your feature film. And the great thing was that we heard nothing but good things, which just reasserted how we felt about it. And we're like, okay, cool. Our gut instinct was good, but we've backed it up. And I think you should do that with everyone. So we've had a wide variety of interests. We have some really more established companies asking us. We've also had some cowboys. But I would actually say, sorry, just had a thought, is there's a Facebook group called Predatory Distributors that I think everyone should follow, because there's some really good information on there just to play it as safe as possible, and just not running with whatever comes first, and checking up there to see what people's actual opinions are.
Well, and it's I tell you a funny story too, where we were at Cannes last year and we were in the Fantastic Pavilion, and there was a really attractive woman who was wearing a Batman jacket, and I was wearing my denim jacket, which has lots of skulls and stuff on it, and so we looked at each other, we clocked each other's jackets, and we were like, cool jacket,
like the Spider-Man
yeah,
meme.
yeah, it was like that. And then so we start talking to each other, and I go oh yeah, we got a film that we just made, and we're hoping to put in a festival. She's like, oh, have you got a sales agent? Are you just and she just produces a card, starts giving me the hard sell. And I'm like, oh shit, I am not prepared. I thought we were just having a casual conversation. Yeah. And
They're everywhere.
And I was like, did you wear that Batman jacket just to reel me in?
The answer is yes.
I think it's as in anything, when you get to that level of selling your feature, is just read all the contracts with the distributors, with the sales agents, with
read all the contracts. We get a lawyer to read them as well, because the reality is you're not going to know what and we try to educate ourselves as much as possible. We went to a really good sort of talk while we were at the Glasgow Film Festival, just to learn more about contract law. It's fascinating, all the ways, because even one of the things that I loved that we found out that apparently, so Anthony, who's the lawyer who's given it, he said how basically he ended up looking at these contracts from the 1930s and how film contract law basically hasn't changed in over 100 years. It's basically all the same stuff.
Yeah, the language is very similar.
But the reality is, when we're reading it, we kind of yeah, that sounds about right, and then he'll come back and go, no, fuck that, and it's just and it's you aren't going to know this shit. You need somebody to come in and check it.
I always think of is how long you sell the film for. So you sell it into a particular market, you can sell it for 5 years, you can sell it for 10 years, or you can sell it forever, which is what you don't want to do, because you want to retain those IP rights, because you can then sell the film later on to streamers or to various places and just keep recouping money from it.
Yeah. No, I mean, it really varies. In our particular instance, we sold it to a sales agent, so they're selling it on to distributors as well. So effectively, they are somewhat like a middleman, but then they also have their own relationships. Whereas, if we were approaching distributors directly, there's nothing to say that they would take us seriously.
You wouldn't even get it in front of them necessarily.
Probably not. Yeah. No, it's a bit like having, a literary agent and being able to get a script in front of a production company.
And the sales agents know who the predatory distributors are as well, because they won't deal with them.
Well, the reality is...
Because the distributor hasn't paid for the last 3 films that we sold to them. We're not touching, the last one probably, but won't touch them.
Well, and the reality is, too, if you go to any kind of film market, it is a fascinating experience. We were at Cannes last year. You go into the Cannes film market, it is just a world of just incredible, terrible looking shit that you have you will never see in your life. You don't know who's watching it, you don't know, but it's all there. They've all got posters of it, they're all selling it. And and if you want a real tip for a really weird thing to do, is if you're at the Cannes Film Market, go down into the basement, because the basement is where the really weird shit is.
It's not for the faint of heart. I mean, it can be a bit dispiriting, but I also think it's in everyone's best interest to inform themselves as much as they possibly can. I think it has been quite confronting in some ways, but I think also feel a lot more empowered as a result.
It sort of throws back to that thing you said right at the start about, well, I can do that or better. So I guess it can be dispiriting, but also if you go down there, you can go, wow, this is at the Cannes Film Festival. I can make something way better than this. And that's reassuring, presumably.
Yeah, I think there's definitely an element where you kind of go like, this thing got distribution, therefore I must be able to do that in some kind of a way. It's
I've got one more question. What's the best piece of advice you ever got?
I think actually one of the most interesting ones that I got given, and it's always really stuck with me, is you will never be able to sit in the same room with everybody that was watching your film and go, oh, on that day, like we only had half a day, so we weren't really able to get what we wanted. Like if you just like, I know this effect isn't that great, but like if you just think about it from this, you have to always make your film with the idea being that people are going to take it at face value. And you also have to accept then that people are not going to like your film sometimes, It's like, and that's the reality. Is we can definitely say, like with Kill Your Lover, there's people who don't like the film, It's like there's people who are put off by the violence and sex and all of the intensity of it. But,
We'd have always rather made a Marmite movie than just a passable movie as well. So there's people who, like the people who get it really get it. And that's so validating. And you're like, oh, great. It's almost like you make a new friend because you're like, oh, you get it. That's great. Leading off that advice, I think you can't sit next to everyone and explain the situation of your movie. I would definitely say in the spirit of that, when you are on the other end, and of course, all the foibles and all the things that you wish you could have done better. Like everyone likes to think that they're just, when they get to do it, they're going to do it better than everyone that came before. And then you get to the other side and, you're barely alive and you're like, I'm glad just to be alive. Ultimately I would say stand up there and just sell the movie, represent the movie in the best possible way. Because I've seen people who stand up there and then they go, oh, we made a thing and we hope you like it. And it's just like the energy is just not there. And you're like, hey, we fucking made a thing. Isn't this great? We had a good time making it. We're so glad it exists. I mean, any film, especially feature film, is a minor miracle, to be honest. So, be there for your film, as I would say. And both of us would share this opinion, I think, is learn to pivot. Learn to pivot. Don't worry about it not being perfect, which as a recovering perfectionist is like a big step for me. It's like if you'd have told me 10 years ago that I would have been just pivoting and making it up as we went along, I would have been like, oh my God, that sounds so scary. But the more you realize that you are likely to fuck up, but that you can recover from it, the less seriously you'll take yourself.
And you won't be paralyzed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And the more free you will be to actually make it happen. And that's,
In the same way that we ended up recasting the film 2.5, a month and a half before we shot, we decided we were going to shoot the flashbacks and then shoot the rest of the film, 3 months later. It's like, find ways to make the problems a feature. Try and find ways that you can kind of correct for those things and make the best out of them. And I think that's it. Like filmmaking, people have it's like we always talk about the notion of there's the three films you make, and we didn't come up with this. This is obviously an old adage, but there's the three films you make. There's the one you make in pre-production, the one you make in production, and there's the one you make in post-production. Those three films are different. And you have to be willing to go with that and know that along the way, things are going to change, and you have to steer into the things that are going to change as you're going.
Amazing. I think that, well, first of all, thank you so much for your time. I think we'll draw it to close there. We'll put into our bios a link to Switchblade Cinema, and once the film's out, of course, we'll help share that.
Fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for everything.